welcome back to the Crypto Currently podcast for Tuesday, June 19th. Man, this month is flying by. A lot to get to today. Apparently the Democrats have a brand new favorite toy. Once again, they found something to enrage the people. What else will it be? What will it be in 2 weeks from now? Right? This is how, you start. Listen, I would consider myself a pragmatic spiritualist, right? If there is such a thing. Like Soren Kierkegaard was called, affectionately coined or insultingly coined the phrase the first existential Christian, right? And so I joke around and I'll say, well, I'm the second existential Christian. I'm a big fan of Kierkegaard, right? And not just because he said really profound things, but it was the way that he said it, like his rhythms of speech and his rhythms of writing. They're very, like, when I read his stuff, it's like it's in the same rhythm that I write and that I speak. I am not saying I am as smart as Soren Kierkegaard. Please don't. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, the way that he said things, it pissed people off a lot. Like, his style of talking, and he's certainly not the only one who had it, but his style of conveying the things that he tried to say was he would make his point first, and then the rest of the sermon or speech or lecture or whatever it is that you want to call it, he'd make his point first, and then he would explain himself, right? Well, that's not efficient at all, and I know that because that's the way I do it, right? And I do it that way because that's, that's the way it makes sense in my mind. But man, I get into a lot of trouble doing it that way. And so did Kierkegaard, right? He would stand up on stage and he would start off by saying, there was nothing admirable about the life of Jesus Christ, right? And this was over 200 years ago, in a very, very Christian society, right? He'd get up and he would say that. And, there's nothing admirable about the life of Christ, and the whole crowd would just be like, what did he just say? And he would say, because the life of Christ meant that, you either had to follow him or you had to walk away. There were only those, the way that Jesus lived his life and the way that he said the things that he said, it meant that you either had to embrace it and follow him, or you had to walk away. But there would be no middle ground. There would be no standing by and admiring from a distance, right? Because there's nothing admirable about a 30-year-old man with no job and no home who is hated by the establishment. There's nothing admirable about that, right? You can't admire that. That's not something you can admire and strive for. It's like, you either need to realize that you need to follow, right? Which is going to mean certain poverty and missing meals and being ridiculed and being shunned and outcasts by your society, or it meant that you had to walk away, but there was no middle ground. And that's what Kierkegaard was saying. But of course, he said it in a very offensive way. He would start off by making his point. And so I kind of really went off on that there. Pragmatic spiritualism, right? Now, how do you do that? It was like if I start talking about angels and demons, it's like 90% of you people listening, your eyes are going to roll over, because it's like, I might as well be talking about Bigfoot and unicorns, right? You start talking about angels and demons, it's like, what, dude, you're off in la la land, even amongst, the Christian community, because you're talking about things that cannot be proven, right? It's all theory and speculation, but it's like, well, wait a minute, what if there's a pragmatic approach to this? What if there was a way of conceptualizing it in a way that everybody, atheists included, could understand, right? Take demons, for example. Right, it's a tough one, because you go back in the New Testament and Jesus' times, whatever, here's Jesus healing the sick of palsy. People had palsy back then. People had leprosy and whatever, and people had all kinds of different things. Epilepsy, right? And it says that he was an epileptic, or he had the palsy, or she had, the palsy, or she had whatever, right? You see that even back then, even 2,000 years ago, there was a medical diagnosis for what those problems were. They were epilepsy, they were palsy, they were, a lot of different things. But also, in that same, thread, it'll say, and he cast that evil spirit out. Right? So how do you marry those two things together? Where it's like it's a sickness, right? It's a disease. It's a problem of physiology and whatnot. And they knew it. They knew it 2,000 years ago. It's right there in the scripture. They knew it was epilepsy. They knew it was palsy. And yet, it says that Jesus cast out the unclean spirits or the evil spirits or whatever. So how do you marry those two concepts in the fact that they're in the same thread? Like you read that one passage of scripture and both of those acknowledgments are in there. How do you marry those two? It's difficult. So let's just take it pragmatically, right? Let's just be real, like to the atheist. Now, if you're listening and you're a Christian of any stripe, or an atheist or whatever, like we'll just look at it this way, right? Have you ever seen somebody, like if you live near or in a major metropolitan area, maybe you live in Houston, Texas, San Diego, California, Salt Lake City, Utah, you know what I mean, like a major hub of where people tend to gather and warehouse their food and that sort of thing. Well, chances are that you know somebody or have at least seen somebody who is years into a crystal methamphetamine binge, right? Like somebody who's been doing meth for years and years and years, right? You see them, and they've got that weird appearance to their face, don't they? They've got that shrunken, shriveled look, and their jaw seems to protrude a little bit, and their eyes have gone like beady. It's weird because there's a similarity. Like if you live in one of those cities I mentioned and you traveled to one of those other cities that I mentioned and you saw another tweaker, you would notice some of the same characteristics. But the thing that I'm getting at is you see that person and they're walking down the street and they're babbling and they're moving in very peculiar, like their bodies are moving in ways that it's like, oh, people don't move like that normally, right? That's not what happens. Like when I go to work and I see all of my coworkers, none of them are doing that, right? So you talk about, spirituality, right? And this is for the atheists. So to all my Christian friends, pretend you're an atheist for just a second and you don't know any, like this is completely outside of your wheelhouse, and you're just coming to the table of this particular discussion right now. Well, like heaven and hell, right? Like that's obviously a tough one for folks like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and people like this, right? That's a tough one because it's like, again, you can't prove it. So, okay, right? Like when you die, you're either going to be annihilated, right? Like nothing's going to happen. You're just going to die and that's it. Or you're going to go to some sort of spiritual destination, right? Those are the two prevalent beliefs. Atheists believe that when you die, that's it, nothing happens, and everybody else believes that something happens, that you live on in some other form, right? Well, take that tweaker, right? When discussing heaven and hell, look at the tweaker and you look at that man, and to you I would say, all right, when it comes to heaven and hell, you're absolutely correct. I cannot prove that either of those two places even exist. Can't prove it, right? But what I can prove is this, right? You look at that tweaker and get that image in your mind because you know that you've seen him. You know that you've seen that guy. Some of you, I had a really compelling conversation with one of the listeners. Some of you have even been that guy, right? You were in that trap and got out, right? I had to, I wanted to read it on the show, but it was too personal. I didn't want to put this guy's business out in the street. So, but let me digress, get away from that. Heaven and hell, right? You look at that tweaker, get that image in your mind, all right? Now that person that you can see in your imagination right now, that person is not going to hell when he dies. He's in hell right now. You look at him, that's hell, right? He's already there. Maybe the way it works is this, or maybe the way it works is that, or maybe the way it works is like, when you die, you don't actually go anywhere. It's just everything else goes away. And you are standing right where you were standing at the point of your death, right? And if you were in hell when you die, when you were alive, then you're in hell when you die. I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that when we look at that guy, we can look at him and say, sweet Jesus, that man is in hell. Right? Is there any other way to explain it? And the language that people like that, people that, are in the throes of crystal methamphetamine, or they're years and years and years into, alcoholism, and they develop what's called wet brain, right? And they babble, and they don't, it's like their language has been muted and taken away from them, but they make these noises, like these babbling noises, and they say nonsensical things. It's like, okay, well, that's what if we looked at that as like an established language? Like, that's the language of demons, right? Nonsense, right? Just undiscernible, just nonsense, right? Well, what if what if it's that? What if we assign that noise that tweakers and people that are so addicted to alcohol that they're just homeless and they can't think or whatever? Like, what if those noises that they made with their voice? What if we just assigned it like an economic value and said, okay, well, that's a language. And it's the language of nonsense. It's the language of the broken, right? The people who've been overwhelmed by the things in their life, and they've succumbed. They gave up fighting for whatever reason, and now they're weak, they're broken, and as near to being irredeemable as a man can possibly get, right? Because in my personal belief, it's like, you're only irredeemable when you're dead, but that's a different topic. Anyways, devils quoting scripture. That's a very familiar thing. We had Hillary Clinton getting on stage quoting Jesus, right? Suffer the little children to come unto me. And she said, that's what Jesus said. He didn't say cause the little children to suffer. It's like, oh, all right, devil, you want to start talking scripture, do you? I see. Well, let's discuss that passage that you just brought up. What was Jesus talking about? He's talking about bring the children to me to learn from me, learn my ways, be disciples. So Hillary Clinton, are you saying that you want to bring these children from all over the world and teach them Christianity? Teach them to follow Jesus? I thought you were the party of, we don't like, colonizers. Right? We don't like white people who teach Christianity to other peoples. I thought that's who the party. You see what I'm saying? That's how you know it's like it's demonic. It's the sound. It's the sound that demons make. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's nonsense. You want to quote that particular scripture? Well, let's look at the context in which that scripture was spoken. You know what I mean? This is the thing with the modern day political climate right now, is that you're seeing a very spiritual things happening, right? And the problem is that, like, when you talk about spiritual matters, it's like, again, man, people are just like, man, you're talking about Bigfoot and unicorns, right? You're talking about aliens from outer space, man. You're talking a bunch of nonsense that is from some book that was, that was written over 1,500 years, and the last time there was an entry was 2,000 years ago. Like that's it. You know what I mean? Like, for good reason, people turn away from that kind of conversation, because you get into some territory where it's like very quickly you can start sounding and behaving like Benny Hinn or Joel Osteen. You know what I mean? Where it's just people talking fluffy bullshit, and it's not helpful. But let's try to be pragmatic about this and look at this, right? Donald Trump goes on TV and calls MS-13 gang members a bunch of animals, right? Which was, in my opinion, a complete insult to animals. Right? But he called them a bunch of animals, like subhumans. Well, I don't know what else, I would have called them demons, right? They're people who literally rape infants and then murder them and then chop them up. And then we saw Nancy Pelosi go on TV and said, and rebuke the president and say, does he not know? Doesn't he know that everybody has a divine spark? It's like, well, that's kind of like what a demon would say, right? You're trying to pull on people's heartstrings so that their hearts will be more soft and more caring and more empathetic to people who murder and rape babies? I don't think we need that, personally. I mean, I'm open to an argument on that, but you're not going to be able to turn me from that. It's like, no, those people got to die, right? Those people need to be shoved off of the cliff into irredeemable land. You know what I mean? We can't have them in our society. They can't be here. They're murdering children. I'm sorry, sir, but you have broken a cardinal rule, and now you've got to go. We can't have you on this planet. Because there's nowhere that we can have you where it's like, we can't dedicate resources to keeping our eye on you for the rest of your life. That's a drain on my life. We can't do that. You got to go. And we have laws for that. We are a nation of laws. And in this problem right now, this new toy that the Democrats have come up with, and it really is a toy, because you watch, 4 weeks from now, right? Today is June 19th. Let's just say July 15th. No. July, let's say the first weekend of July 10th-ish. They'll be talking about, this will not be in the news. This isn't what the Democrats will be talking about on July 10th. And how do I know that? Well, because I can time travel back, right? If you want to know the future, look at the past. What was it 2 weeks ago that the Democrats were talking about? Kim Jong-un, how, the president was going to start a nuclear war, or they were talking about the trade war with Canada. And before that, it was, they had paraded a couple of kids from the Parkland school shooting massacre. And they took a handful of those kids and just paraded them around the country and put them on stages and gave them microphones, called it a grassroots movement. Well, guess what? The Democrats, they're done sleeping with that whore. Now they've kicked that whore out of the bed. And they're off to a new whore, right? They're whoring out children. That's what they're doing. They took those kids from Parkland who had just went through an unimaginable tragedy, right? They saw their own classmates being slaughtered right in front of them. And they took those kids, and you could say, well, it was the mainstream media that did that. Well, we'll get to the Democrats, the Democrat Party's influence over mainstream media here in a second. But that's what they did. They took those kids and they said, look, if you don't bow to our will, then you hate children, right? And when they were done wringing all of the life out of that new toy, they just tossed it away. And then they moved on to something else. And this week, what are they talking about? Oh, they're talking about the kids that are being detained at the border. I see. Okay. So let's take this very spiritual thing that's happening and be pragmatic about it, right? Let's apply pragmatism to this very complicated, horrific thing that's happening on our border, right? Let's take a look at it. How can we approach this and feel safe that our approach is going to lead us to the right direction? Well, I think number one, you would have to say, well, I think, as it is that we are a nation of laws, perhaps the law is where we ought to start, right? I mean, is there anybody that, even the furthest lefty, bedwetting liberal, is there any one of those people that could disagree with that? Like perhaps the laws that we have on the books they're just bad, right? And by the way, fellow Republican, fellow Christian, guess what? George Bush has his hand in this. There were laws that George Bush passed and enforced that is causing this horrific situation. And I don't think it's any coincidence that, Laura Bush is getting on TV rebuking the president, and President Bush has been on TV rebuking the current president, which is, by the way, forever, that's been a taboo. Why is this happening? Why are these two families, you know what I mean? Like more and more it's looking like, man, we were this, we had two ruling families. That means we were this close, right? I'm holding my index finger and my thumb very close to each other. We were very close to living back in a monarchy, right? There were two ruling families ruling our politics for the last 20 years, 30 years, whatever, since Bush, 1988, however long that is, a long ass time, right? 30 years almost. 2 ruling families. That's dangerous. We were very close to having Hillary Clinton in office, and someday I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discovered where people are going to have to look at that and say that was divine intervention that saved us, right? Because that is a wicked human being. I'm talking evil. I'm talking about the things that are being alleged around it. It's like, look, Cat Williams, famous comedian. He was on stage one time, and he had he's a black comedian, and in one of his specials, he was talking to an all-black audience. And, in America, we all love Michael Jackson, right? Most of us look away from the allegations because it's like, well, it was never proven, so it's okay for me to, turn on Beat It, or turn on Billie Jean and whatever and rock out to it because those songs are dope, right? And we can just kind of dismiss it, but in the black community, you have to understand, Michael Jackson was an even bigger hero to the black community because it was like, oh, that's one of our people. And he's the most famous person who ever lived. He's bigger than the Beatles ever were. He's bigger than Elvis Presley ever was. He's the biggest thing ever, and he's black like me. You know what I mean? So Cat Williams is up on stage, and he's saying, he's like, look, man, and I'm going to use some cuss words here, so, plug your ears. But he was up there on stage talking to a black audience, and he's like, Michael Jackson's a sick son of a bitch, man. That motherfucker, he was messing around with kids that were dying of cancer, motherfuckers with AIDS, man. He's like, if somebody accuses you of something, maybe you didn't do it. But, man, if people keep accusing you for the same thing for 20 years, it's true. And listen, if you go back and you watch that special, it's like those people in that audience, there was not a peep. There was no clapping, no laughing, no nothing. Like, those people did not want to hear it. But the thing, and this is how liberals are. It's like, look, remember the Pizzagate scandal? It's like, look, if that was the only thing that the Clintons had been, accused of, and other politicians in Washington, I would say, okay, that sounds a little conspiracy theory, right? All right, that's pretty big, but you're just one person making up a bunch of stuff. But this has been, these allegations have been going on since before Bill Clinton was president of the United States, over and over and over and over again. Eventually, something's going to get declassified. Some proof of something is going to emerge, and people are going to burn. Right? There's something going on there. There has to be, because it's like, man, every time you turn around, and now the Inspector General report comes out, it's on page 294. If you want to read it for yourself, it's on page 294 of the Inspector General report. A report of sex trafficking in children, which is demonic. Moloch. That's that demon's name. The one who requires his followers to prey upon children. That's demonic. And there's talk about that in the Inspector General of the United States in that report, right? That's where pragmatism meets spirituality. See how that happens? Those two things converged. And they're converging on this woman who's up on stage quoting my Redeemer, which I do not appreciate, by the way. Nancy Pelosi talking about, doesn't Donald Trump know that these child rapists they're just God's little angels? Right? It's like, listen, shut your mouth, you filthy demon, you weakling. Be gone. I cast you out. And that's what we're doing as a nation, is casting these people out. It's exorcism. That's what this is, by way of voting. Right? By way of speaking up and using your First Amendment, when the founding forefathers said, first, use your voice. God gave you that. There's no taking it away from you. Use it. Second, you have the right to protect yourself and form a militia with your friends. That's number 2. And then it goes on, and all those things were love letters to us for this particular day. This day that we're living in, where we're finding out that our politicians are so low that they will parade children and use them as little pawns to bend the hearts of the American people. Oh, look at these things. It's like, son of a bitch, your people did this. It wasn't just Bush who did it, although his hands are not clean. None of these people's hands are clean. Obama, Clinton, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, President Bush, this goes back a long ways. And it's all like this weird evil cabal of people who have demonstrated that they've used the offices of the FBI to try to turn an election. You say, oh, Pete, that's conspiracy. Is it conspiracy theory? Did you not see Bernie Sanders suing the the DNC? Did you not see Bernie Sanders suing the DNC? And guess what the DNC said? They came out and they said, yep, we did. We took all those votes that you got and we just gave them to Hillary Clinton. You did in fact win, but we decided we wanted Hillary Clinton instead. And Bernie Sanders said, but wait a minute, that's illegal. And the DNC said, no, it's not. This is our committee. This is our convention. We can do whatever we want. And the courts decided in favor of the DNC. That's a fact. That is a fact that happened. You can read it. And Democrats, where are you at on that one? You just saw the will of the people being subverted. That's a very spiritual matter. The will of the people is a spiritual concept. The collective idea of like choosing your leaders, like, you know, the people of California chose Bernie Sanders. The people of Florida chose Bernie Sanders. That's a fact. And the will of the people was subverted. That's a fact. You can say, yeah, but it's all very explainable and pragmatic. It's like, yeah, but it's also, that's a very spiritual concept. And so coming back to this evil that we're seeing the Democrats doing right now, of once again parading children in front of everybody, that old trick. Oh, thank God there's a tragedy involving children, because now we can twist this into making it look like it's all Donald Trump's fault. It's like, okay, cool. Which law? Which law did Donald Trump sign into legislation that's causing this to happen? Oh, that's right. He hasn't signed a single one having to do with this, right? And then I heard an argument earlier today, well, it's not the law, man, it's the policy. It's the policy, and if you have bad law, then that opens the door for bad policy. Fair enough. I believe you. I'm with you. Sounds like we need to change the laws then. And to what end? This is where we get into pragmatism, like hardcore pragmatism. How do we figure out this problem? Well, as I said, first, maybe, just maybe, since we are a nation of laws, perhaps we ought to address that. Maybe we should rely on, destroying old laws and creating new laws and putting them in place. Well, what should we do then? Well, we already discussed the politics of it. Now let's get into the economics of it. Who do we want to let in? Who do we want? Everybody? I mean, there's a lot of Democrats out there, mostly kids in their 20s and feminists and, whatever. They'll say, we need to bring them all in. We need to bring them all in. Look at these. Remember the I love cats lady? I love cats, and she just wanted to bring all the kittens. She wanted all the kittens, right? Because that's, the people who love cats, like that's, pretty much how they are. I love cats too, but it's just not to that extent. But that's who some of these people are going to be like, we need to bring them all in. It's like, well, we can't afford that. Most of the world lives in poverty, and we cannot cure that poverty by emptying our pockets and spreading it out over every citizen of the world. It would just mean that everybody would then be poor. So we can't do that. We can't just bring everybody in, right? Maybe we should have a law where it's like we only bring in people who are able to work and able to excel, right? Did you know that statistically, like the wealthiest citizens who don't own, Google and Pfizer and Bayer and these kind of companies, the most successful people in America are immigrants, like first-gen immigrants. Because when people come to the United States, they're like, wait a minute, are you telling me that I can just do anything. Like, I can work really hard, and the harder that I work, and the more that I learn, the more I can have. Are you effing kidding me? Well, wait a minute. What if I have a really good idea, but I can't afford to implement that idea? Oh, wait a minute. You're telling me that I can just go down to a bank, like just a little house that's built in my neighborhood, walk in there, fill out some paperwork, and they'll just lend me the money? Is this, come on, you got to be kidding me. You know what I mean? When they come to America, they're like, holy crap, I can do anything? You know, that's why those people are successful. Because they come here and they work their effing asses off, and they live the American dream. And I love it. I am all for that. I'll tell you why. I mean, for a number of reasons. I mean, good for them. That's one of the reasons. But it's good for me too, because when I see that another man is working harder than me, I think, oh, no. This will not do. I must work harder. I must be more appreciative of the culture that I live in. It's a reminder to me to get my ass in gear, get to work, right? But then there's people, it's like, well, they just want to come here and mooch off of the system because they were told, like, dude, if you go to America, they'll just give you money. You don't have to do shit. They'll just give you food, man. They got plenty. Look, their poorest people are fat people. That's how much food they have. And they don't even make you work. Like, they'll just give you shit. And then other people, now listen, I grew up on the border, right? I told you guys where I used to live. It's Carvaker Road in a town that's in San Diego called Alpine. Carvaker Road, you can look it up on Google Maps and you will see that my entire backyard was Mexico, right? You'll see it. I used to be able to put a saddle on my horse and ride it into Mexico and back and be back before dinner. That's how close to Mexico. So we had people crossing the border, coming across our land that we tended to all the time. And, you know, of course, that was in the 70s and 80s when, you know, those people that were coming across the border, they were honest, hardworking folk, right? Our house got broken into one time in all those years, and guess what was stolen? Stuff out of the refrigerator, right? We had a flimsy door on the front, and they just kicked it in. There was a TV they could have stolen. There was guns, right? We didn't have a gun safe, but there were guns in the house. Nothing. There was my mom's jewelry. Nothing was stolen. Just food out of the refrigerator. So it's like in that case, you know, obviously there was a family discussion afterwards, and it's like, well, you know, you shouldn't be breaking into people's homes, but you know, I mean, if you're gonna break into somebody's home and just steal their food, it's like, you know, we're not gonna get too offended about this. But that's who those people were, man. They were hardworking Mexican folks. You know, my school, it was, I would say, probably half and half. Mexican kids that barely spoke English, who their parents made them like try harder to speak English, and then everybody else. Right? So I have a very soft spot in my heart for those people because it's like, man, San Diego is like one of the richest cities in the world. And that's where I grew up. And right next door is one of the poorest places in the world. It's right there. Like I could stand on my property which sat in one of the richest parts of the entire planet in the history of the world, and with my eyeballs, I could see one of the poorest places in the world. That was a trippy thing, man. This trippy man, right? That was a trippy thing. And these people that lived over there, right? Those people could have their children die from the common cold. Think about that, man. Those people would raise their children and know, well, they didn't, I don't know if they knew or not, but they would raise their children without proper nutrition in their formative years. That's going to have a huge effect on your ability to use your brain for the rest of your life. Like, it's horrific stuff, man. And those people that were coming across the border, they were like, I just need to work. I can come up here and work for less than the minimum wage, send that money home where I live, like that's a fortune. And my kids can eat, and my wife can go to the pharmacy and buy, you know, drugs for, you know, curing colds and the flu and, you know, whatever. Right? it was a very tough thing, but man, that was in the 70s and 80s. It's not like that anymore. We've got drug cartels whose entire operation is posted up right there in Tijuana, right there in Juarez, right there in Tecate, right? The cartels have taken over because America has an insatiable appetite for cocaine, right? We've got people who murder and rape and kidnap, and they're posted up like a military. And their bases are right on our border. That's a problem. That's a problem. It's an undeniable problem. There's nobody out there who's going to say like, yeah, that's not true. The cartels, that's not actually a problem. It's like, son of a bitch, like people are getting murdered. Those people murder journalists, they murder politicians, they murder cops. They don't give a, you know what I almost just said. They don't care. They don't murder anybody. They're animals. Right? That's a problem that needs to be addressed. So let's look at it economically. Like, who are we going to let in? Who are we going to let? Are we going to have some policy that means if you just throw your kid over the wall and endanger the lives of your children, we're just going to welcome you with open arms? Well, that sends a message to the entire world like, hey, man, if you can just get your kid over the wall, if you can throw hard enough, right? Out of those, there's 12,000 kids right now in camps. On the United States side, in our camps that we built for these miners that come across the border. There's 12,000 of them right now. That's per what's that lady's name? Christian Nielsen. She's the Department of Homeland Security. I don't know what she is, spokesperson or the head of the whole thing, whatever. Good looking lady. She said, look, man, we've got 12,000 kids. Guess what? 10,000 of those kids came across unaccompanied. You want to talk about child abuse? What about these parents? 10,000 kids. The parents of 10,000 children sent their kids off unaccompanied. That's child abuse. And to what was your aim? Why did you throw your kid across the desert? The Sonoran Desert is an unforgiving desert. It will kill you. And you sent your kids across that? So you don't give a shit about your kids? And now we're the assholes. Right? So what's the economic, like, how can we reduce this to economics so we can figure out, like, okay, what kind of laws are we going to put in place? And what are we going to do economically that is both just and fair? Right? Well, we're going to have to send a message like, stop sending your kid. Don't do that. You want to come into this country, yes, there are some bureaucratic things that are going to hold you back, but it's not impossible. And I'm sorry that, you live in a shitty country, a shithole country. Maybe you ought to concentrate a little bit more, take a page out of the book of Costa Rica and reform your own government so that you might live in a place that's more peaceful and more economically prosperous. Maybe it's not our fault that you're poor. Maybe it's not our fault. We can't take care of the whole world's problems. Oh, we could just take care of that one. No, we can't, because if we do, we have to let them all in. That's the exact same thinking that got Germany and England and France into all the trouble that they got themselves into. The EU was just like, we can take care of just this one. And then 10 more of them would show up and they'd say, well, we could just take care of these 10. And then 100 more would show up. Oh, we could just take care of these 100. It's only a small percentage, but but God damn it, every time you open the door, the wall falls down and a whole new flood of immigrants come in. And they're not refugees. That's another thing too, man. When you hear these people talking, they use these words. Again, I'm a word snob, right? Words have meanings. And you hear these politicians and they say these words and phrases like asylum seeker. Well, guess what? That phrase, asylum seeker, it has a meaning. Asylum has a meaning, and it doesn't have anything to do with immigration. Refugee is a word that has a meaning that is different than asylum and immigrant. These words have very specific meanings, and they're very important. Those first two that I mentioned, asylum and refugee, those come with legal status. If somebody shows up to our border and says, look, right, I'm a politician where I come from, and my government has been overthrown, and now the people that now run my government, they're looking to kill me, right? That's what you would that would be seeking asylum. And if you show up to our border and you make that claim, then we say, come on in, right? We have a law for that. If you show up and make that claim, you get immediate access, and for good reason. I'm actually for that. The problem is that now we have a bunch of people showing up saying, I'm an asylum seeker, and we have to let them in, right? And then later on we find out, like, oh, you didn't need asylum. You're a nobody. Nobody's trying to kill you, right? And then we got to go find them, and then we got to deport them. And then we have to change the nature of our laws. And guess who that actually screws? The actual person that is being hunted by the drug cartels or the new government or whatever. And then there's refugee. That has a very specific meaning. It means that your nation is at war and you don't want to fight it and you don't want to die in it. So you got, and that law, by the way, the laws that we have for refugees, it goes like this. When you set foot in any new country, that if you, like, let's say you were in Honduras and there was a war. Well, the minute that you step foot in the neighboring country that is not at war, you have to seek asylum there. You have to make your refugee status known the second your foot hits that soil. That's the law. You cannot go to other nations and just shop for the one that's going to give you the most free shit. That's against our laws as it applies to refugee status. Those laws, by the way, that the whole planet has agreed on. Like, we're all in concert on that one. So what are these people? What are they doing? What is the political end of Hillary Clinton getting on stage and quoting Jesus? Well, it's a political move. It's an economic ploy to try to sway the emotions of the people. That's a very economic principle that you're doing there. If you put a bunch of sad-looking kids on TV and say, look at what the Republicans are doing. There's a lot of people out there that are then going to give you their political will. And political will, that's cash money. That's currency. That's an economic principle. And this is where pragmatism meets spirituality, because that's a very spiritual thing to sway the mood or the intent and the political will of the people, and it's demonic. It's absolutely demonic what Hillary Clinton's doing, and I, for one, don't appreciate it. Hey, listen, I want to give a shout out real quick to, hang on one second, listener Mark Kenny. Told you I'd bring this up. Mark Kenny sent me a couple of bucks on PayPal. He says, great show, keep it going. Have listened each day since December 17th. Mark Kenny. Mark! Why am I just now finding out about you? Are you also a ghost creep? Listen, please, Mark, go get Twitter, man. It's free. Look me up, @RealPeteDobson1, @RealPeteDobson1 on Twitter. I want to hear from you, Mark. Don't be such a stranger. You too, Edgar Bevins. All you ghost creeps, get on Twitter. Come on, man. Get with it. It's 2018, all for crying out loud. Thanks for the money, Mark. I appreciate that, sincerely. If you guys want to throw a little dough my way, you can go to my website, archadvocate.com, arch-advocate.com. You can click on the PayPal link, throw a couple of shekels down. Or, if you want to become a patron, become a monthly donor. Patron. I guess those words, like donor, that's not a very good word. If you want to be a patron, send a couple of bucks on a monthly basis. Click on the Patreon link at archadvocate.com, archadvocate.com, arch-advocate.com. I am the Arch Advocate. I'm your biggest fan, man. That's the show for today. I'll talk to you tomorrow.